All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to tonight's episode of Elections Weekly. As usual, I'm your host Eric Cunningham, and with us this week we have Dylan Brown as well. We got the Phillies on tonight, so Joe will not be joining us because he's going to be watching the Phillies game. But we have an interesting show for you here, regardless. It'll be a bit of a briefer show tonight. We wanted to get something for you this week. So we're going to basically be talking about a couple of things. There's interesting generic ballot stuff going on, interesting races seeming to the undecideds, I think, has started to decide, and they're making their decisions predictably to what you would think would happen in a midterm election to some degree. And we're also going to go ahead, we're going to revisit Oklahoma and New York. These are two states that we've dismissed, and we continue to find them to be not entirely on the board, but we're going to explain why. We're going to explain what could be a reason why these states are showing up right now. We do think these are sort of mirages at the moment. We don't think either of these are going to flip. I posted an article earlier today about just how ridiculous it would be for a Republican to be competitive in New York. You need to pull some ridiculous margins to actually win it. But those are going to be what we go over. So let's start with the generic ballot. Let's start with what's going on. It seems like the summer of love for the Democrats has started to die down a bit after about a month or two of consistent Democratic generic ballot leads. Republicans have retaken the lead in the 538 polling average. They've had the lead back in 530 or in Real Clear Politics for a while. They use a different formula than 538. Part of this can be attributed to, among other things, 538 no longer including Center Street polling in their deluxe polling version, which I think is a very good move on their part. But we've also just genuinely been seeing from internals, from discussions of candidates from both parties, that there has certainly been movement in the last, specifically this month. And in hindsight, I think this is pretty believable. Again, the election isn't decided until the votes are counted and we know the results. But what I will say is this is very similar to some of the previous midterms we've seen, like 2014, like 2018, where initially it looked like one party could kind of buck the mold. There were reasons to suspect that in 2014, it was Democrats doing really, really well in a lot of swing states, having a lot of really good polling, having some stretch states. And then in 2018, it was a very, very good economy. The idea was the economy was so good that even if Trump was unpopular, that economy would carry them over the boundary. It didn't work in either case, and I think this time we're seeing something pretty similar. I'll go ahead and throw it to Dylan, though. What are your thoughts about this polling tightening up? I think we've moved our rating. We now have 219 Republicans favor. That number is going to go up this week. I can tell you that. We have already agreed to our ratings internally, and that total will be going up. But it also appears to help in the Senate races in particular, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by this. I haven't been quite as doom and gloom on Democrats' chances as some of our friends, but I have never been very convinced that Democrats were getting ready to break the mold.
Mm-hmm.
I I don't think we're headed for a wave. I mean, I define a wave as like R+5, R+6. I don't see
Mm-hmm.
that yet. Maybe it'll happen, but I don't see it yet. But this was always going to happen. I mean, undecideds break against the party in power in almost every midterm. This is just how it happens. I'm confused as to why there's so much surprise.
Mm-hmm. I think in general, there's been a lot of it more so on Twitter than among analysts. I think the Nate Silvers of the world, as much as people on Twitter do not like Nate Silver, they've been very cautious about predicting Democrats bucking the mold for good reason. It does not happen. You can count twice in the last 100 years where this has actually happened to a serious
Mm-hmm.
degree. 1998, where you had an unprecedentedly unpopular impeachment with a very, very, very popular incumbent president, and the opposition party, the Republicans, taking the brunt of it for a bad decision they made. And then 2002, you had literally the largest terrorist attack in American history, a president who was enormously popular throughout most of the year. And even then, it was not a total success for Republicans. They did retake the Senate, but if you look at the states that they won and the states they lost a lot of states in a wave you would think they would have carried. Um,
Uh, yeah, I think Democrats could have bucked the mold if the Dobbs decision came down in, say, August
mhm.
instead of when did it come down? June?
It came earlier in the year, I think June. Yeah.
Yeah, if it had come in August, I think we'd be looking at a very different environment right
But the problem is you're looking at a situation right now where you have a president who is not popular. His approval rating is normalized. Again, people are sort of confused why the generic ballot is trending Republican while Biden's approval is trending up. What is actually happening is Democrats who did not like Joe Biden are now generally okay with him. On the
Mhm.
other hand, though, Republican voters and independent voters in general who are undecided on whether or not to vote for Republicans are deciding to vote for Republicans more in line with the presidential approval rating. Again, we have seen this with virtually every midterm in American history, in recent American history. To expect different is interesting. There are reasons you could have thought that, but when you have an unpopular president, an economy that is just not doing that great, you have really bad inflation, you have good unemployment numbers, but there's some cracks under the surface that people are the start of a recession. It's not even a 2018 situation where you had a very good economy, and even that was enough. That was one of the like objectively speaking, that economy was really good. You had low unemployment, you had low inflation, you had wages going up. It was really good, and that still got you one of the biggest Democratic midterms in recent history because
I
you had a
do
president
think,
who was just unpopular.
yeah, I do think if Biden had that economy, we'd be looking at a very different midterm.
We
Trump
would.
was just a very polarizing.
Hmm.
He was uniquely polarizing,
Yeah.
I think.
The thing is, though, Joe Biden is not Donald Trump, and this economy is not that
No,
economy. You
no.
have it's just I think Biden's approval coming up is good for Democrats because it reduces that worst case scenario. But generally speaking, when the undecided start to go home and they're going to the other side, which is what you should expect in a midterm election, people are starting to be a little more realistic about the chances that this does buck the trend. I'm not saying it's impossible that Democrats hold the Senate, but I think the idea that Democrats could hold the House is a lot more of a minority take at
I
this point than it was.
I don't know why. I don't know why people were expecting that at all, even at the height of the
Mhm.
um, even at the height of Democrats improving on the generic ballot. Even a D+2 year would have it still would have been iffy, and I don't think many people were expecting D+2.
Mhm.
So I think that was wish casting.
It's certainly it was more of a hot take sort of thing I think you were seeing than an actual top grade political analysis.
Yeah, the
Um,
Senate could still hold
yeah,
though,
but
because
even that's showing a little bit of cracks in a lot of regards.
yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania, not it doesn't look great for Democrats anymore, as we've talked about ad nauseum.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, we're not really
but
in Pennsylvania. We've basically beaten a dead horse out of that. I want some more information before we talk about it more because it's just
yeah,
really boring right now. We know the situation there. We're just waiting to
yeah,
see the results.
yeah, Georgia looks actually better for Warnock than it did like a month and a half ago. I think that I think the seat Democrats need to worry about is Nevada. I think the
Mhm.
rest are. I think they're slightly favored in the rest.
Yeah. North Carolina, Wisconsin, as always, were pipe dreams. Mandela Barnes has just been destroyed, for lack of a better term, by the ad campaign. He never had an answer for this. They should have had an answer for this. They didn't have an answer for it. North
And
Carolina, yeah, North Carolina was, as always, not going to happen.
yet
Uh,
North Carolina's North Carolina.
yeah, again, this is a margin. This is a state that is marginally Republican in presidential years, pretty Republican in midterms that are Republican, and maybe somewhat competitive for Democrats, maybe favorable for them in the Republican presidential midterm. But we're not in that right now. I mean, you have a two nothing Senate candidates here who are running a nothing race, spending basically no money by North Carolina standards. I think we've always said we thought it would be like 4 to 8 for Bud. I'm actually more 5 to 8 at this point. I think the early voting is compared to 2018, it's not looking like that. That was about an even year in North Carolina. Um, but yeah,
And yeah,
Wisconsin is the interesting one. Wisconsin is just completely fallen off the board, and it's entirely
well,
on candidate quality.
yeah, Wisconsin and Arizona are both, I think, entirely on candidate quality.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um, I know some people still think Blake Masters has a a decent shot. I don't see it.
I think it's better than it was a couple of weeks ago. I think there was an article that came out earlier today from some Democratic campaign workers, basically Democratic politicos in the state of Arizona. Were saying it looked like a 1 point race right now. I would still lean towards
Mm,
Kelly. We still have it. It leans Democratic right now. If Carrie Lake starts to break away from this thing, though, and I think there's a possibility that might happen, that's when you would be concerned if you're a Democrat, because at that point you're hoping that people are willing to pull the trigger for Kelly Lake or for Carrie Lake, but not for Blake Masters. And this is with Lake running an explicitly vote for Blake and Lake campaign. She is being very specific, and you need to vote for both of us, which very few other governors and the gubernatorial candidates in the country are doing. You're not seeing Scott and Rubio campaigning together, even though both of them are going to win. You're not seeing Kemp and Walker campaigning together. You're not seeing Evers and Mandela Barnes, even though he's his lieutenant governor. You're not seeing them two tying themselves together like that. This is the one state where the two candidates are actually trying to work together for that, and it's entirely a bailout for the more credible candidate, or rather the one who's doing better. On paper, Masters is the more credible candidate, but that's not saying a whole lot.
Yet neither of them are credible. I mean, they might win, but that doesn't make them great candidates.
The problem is Katie Hobbs is bar none the worst gubernatorial candidate in the country, I would say, for a major party in a competitive state. It's hard to find.
Doug Mastriano.
Fair enough.
Yeah, you can't.
Second most. Mastriano. Yes, second most. I mean, you could put Crist, but Florida was never going to be competitive. She's actually looking better now. It's looking closer there.
She is looking better, but still, Tudor.
Yeah. And also, that was less of a recruiting error and more of a candidates not having enough signatures error.
That was the entire state party shit the bed error.
Yeah. But regardless, I think the interesting thing here is what the margin ends up at. I hear people internally on the Republican side saying R+7. That's what they're expecting? We'd probably be more towards R to 3 to 5 at this point. Even that's enough for probably 235 House districts and maybe flipping the Senate. Especially if Nevada is the first day of early voting was derailed by a sandstorm. It's not a great start for that.
That's a bad omen.
That's a really bad omen. Omen.
But on the other hand, the Georgia early vote looks pretty good for Warnock.
It looks decent. I'm cautious about looking too much into the tea leaves there.
I mean,
it's not as good.
Kind of what we do here.
It's not as good as it was in 2020. I will say that the early voting is not as good as it was then. That being said, the goal here, obviously, of Warnock is to force a runoff. I would say unequivocally that is the goal of the Warnock campaign. They are hoping to force a runoff. I don't think that's even questionable at this point. But that's their goal.
I mean, winning outright was always kind of unlikely.
Mm-hmm. The idea being that it would be easier for them to win in a runoff than it would be to actually win outright. Whereas I think the Walker campaign would prefer to not go to a runoff. But I don't think that's necessarily a given that would be a bad thing for the campaign, because you'd be expecting the same thing that happened in 2020, which when we were in 2020, people were expecting the same thing to happen to every other runoff in the history of Georgia, which is that the person who won the original election got the most votes wins the second time. And that didn't happen. So I would urge caution there, but it does not look bad for Warnock. I would agree there.
I mean, it's the only early vote that looks genuinely good for Democrats.
Yeah. After a couple of weeks of word on the street being that Oz would lead on a poll, Oz has actually led in a poll for the first time, which is impressive. It's the WIC poll, so take that as you will.
Grain of salt.
Grain of salt. That being said,
he got his one.
He got his lead. I am still getting major Tom Tillis, Cal Cunningham vibes here. Frankly, any Tom Tillis race whatsoever is the vibes I'm getting here.
I don't disagree. I think Oz could very well win without leading in a single poll other than WIC.
A single real poll that is not WIC and it's not Big Penguin.
A single credible poll. I don't even know if Trafalgar would count.
Trafalgar would not count. Yeah. So basically as it is right now, again, you can check our ratings at electionsdaily.com or elections-daily.com. We have a full set of them there. We're going to be updating them Monday. We're also going to be shifting to bi-weekly updates. We're going to be updating twice a week. So we're going to be having updates for you probably Monday and Friday each week, or Monday and Thursday over these last couple of weeks, because there's so much going on. But now let's go into I think this will be an interesting portion. Again, we talked about this before, is what is going on with these safe races that are seeming to be on the board at the last minute, specifically referring to Oklahoma and New York. We have talked to death about Oklahoma. We'll say, from internals, people again on the Republican side, they are saying there's been a shift in rural areas, possibly 30 to 40 points. That would be enough to make the state competitive, simply put. So that would be on the other on one hand, and on the other hand, New York. After months of memeing this into existence, there have been about 3 or 4 semi-credible polls that have Lee Zeldin and Kathy Hochul within a reasonably competitive distance, the realm you would normally consider likely, 8 to 12 points, some of them as close as 4 or 6. We're talking Quinnipiac poll, Siena poll. Again, these are pollsters which may have issues, but are generally seen as relatively credible. This is not the big penguins of the world, which are not real. This is not the Trafalgars of the world, which are Trafalgar. This is not
Not
even
real.
yeah. This is not even the morning consults of the world, where their ratings make no sense. These are reasonably credible pollsters showing an unusual result. The key thing in both races seems to be specific or local issues that the other candidate is focusing on. In Oklahoma, it is laser focused on education and on Stitt's tumultuous relationship with the Native American community, the 5 civilized tribes in Oklahoma, or 5 tribes, as they probably prefer to be called now. Traditionally, is what they were called. The 5 tribes, his relationship or lack thereof with them, the rural education cuts, all that stuff is what seems to have put Oklahoma again into the likely range. We still have this at safe. I don't anticipate we'd move this until the final week because we were being very cautious with these sorts of things. And then in New York, Lee Zeldin is basically running a single issue campaign focused on crime and criminal justice policy, specifically targeting bail reform laws, progressive prosecutors. Notably, he was attacked earlier in the campaign while he was at a campaign rally. His attacker was then released on bail, or released without bail because they abolished bail. And then he had several people shoot each other in front of a shootout in front of his house in Long Island. None of this has been great press for the incumbent Democrats, and you're starting to see, bizarrely enough, the New York Times saying the race seems close. The New York Post, of course, wish casting as usual because they are the New York Post in local elections. And also, even oddly enough, the Manhattan borough president telling people to stop, telling New Yorkers to stop campaigning for other races and to start campaigning for New York races. That's probably the most serious one, is if he's seeing some issues on that end. I did the polling. I did the work myself. I wrote an article on this that went out on the website earlier today. I don't see a scenario where Lee Zeldin can win this thing. You can spot Lee Zeldin, the top margins any Republican has performed, 2010 to 2018, upstate. You can, so basically applying the turnout, give him the best margins 2010 to 2018 upstate. Give him Trump margins to start out with in New York City, downstate suburbs, Westchester County, and Putnam. Shift the suburbs 20 points, shift New York City 30 points, and that still has him losing by 2. I think it's more likely that he loses than he, for example, wins Queens outright, which he'd probably need to do to win a gubernatorial election in New York, given he's not going to be winning Ithaca or winning any of these other places previous Republican gubernatorial winners have done when they've won elections, which is to basically win every county upstate except for maybe Albany, and then get like 27% of the vote in New York City. 27% of the vote would not be enough to make this race competitive. It would be enough to move it into like 12 points, but 27 would not be enough to change things here. You would need to literally turn back the clock in Westchester County, pull Rob Astorino margins there, which will not happen because that guy was a one-of-a-kind candidate who was the county executive before Trump. We're just generally skeptical of this. That being said, I know, Dylan, you wanted to talk about sort of this thing. These local elements for right now seem to have done enough into bringing these races on the bubble of competitiveness. And by the bubble, I mean they're somewhere between likely and safe, in my opinion.
Okay.
Can partisanship overcome, or can these local issues overcome partisanship in these states?
Yes, but not. Yes, they can, but I don't think they will. Mm-hmm. Look, I have my bias. I am very left-leaning. I will not believe New York is competitive until Lee Zeldin has won.
And I'm having to eat a cricket.
Yeah. Until the cricket is halfway in your mouth, I will not believe this. I don't. We're not in the days where Republicans other than Phil Scott and Chris Sununu, I never know how to pronounce his name.
Sununu.
Um, other than them, I don't think we're really in the days where challenger moderate Republicans can win in a deep blue state. I just don't. I don't
Mhm.
see it. I'm much more inclined to believe Oklahoma is on that bubble, just because of what we do know. But I'm not there with New York yet.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think another thing here is that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have nominated better candidates for these states. This is the weird thing, is that neither of these candidates are actually great fits for their state. Joy Hoffmeister is basically a standard Democrat on every issue, is running a 100% pro-choice campaign in support of gun control in Oklahoma. She's basically relying on this rural anxiety over schools and over tribal issues to get her into competitiveness. But since she became a Democrat, she has adopted the Democratic Party line on basically everything except maybe the death penalty. Um, there's nothing cultural for her to lean into here. And then in New York, Lee Zeldin, yes, he's from Long Island. He's an Orthodox Jew. He's not Orthodox. He's Jewish. He has specific ties that help out. He's also extremely conservative, very pro-Trumpy, has doubted the legitimacy of the election, has some weird, not as far as other Republicans go, but probably too much for New York. Certainly too much for New York in any other case, where he's just too conservative for the state of New York. Every Republican who has won in New York, save for James Buckley, who won because the vote was split between a liberal Democrat and a liberal Republican. Every statewide winner in New York that's been a Republican has been a moderate. That is not Lee Zeldin. Lee Zeldin is a conservative. That's another issue here, I think, is that the candidates actually do not line up with their states, which makes it even harder to justify the partisan switch. With Kentucky, the best comparison here is Kentucky for Oklahoma. Matt Bevin was beyond unpopular. He was losing counties in a primary. Republicans have won since the Civil War. He was reviled by the establishment. He was reviled by rural voters for cutting school funding. And the Democratic candidate was running basically a nothing campaign about rural schools, was the son of a very, very popular ex-governor, and still barely squeaked out a win. Kevin Stitt is not that unpopular as far as I can tell.
No, he has a positive approval rating.
It's positive or barely below water. And by barely I mean within 5. It's either plus 10 or minus 5. It's somewhere in that range.
Yeah, he's not Matt Bevin or Sam Brown back levels unpopular.
And for that matter, Kathy Hochul is the same thing. At worst, her approval is, I think, been showing us somewhere like 46%, 45%. That's not great. The fact she's not from New York doesn't help. The fact that there's been some controversies doesn't help the crime stuff, but it's New York. You probably would expect someone to be at like 30% before races like this start to become competitive. Like if Kathy Hochul was at 30% of the vote and the Republican nominee was Rob Astorino, and this is like before Trump, I could maybe see a situation where this thing was somewhat competitive, because you have that suburban popularity. You have a very unpopular governor with no connection to New York City. That'd be what would be needed. That's not the case, though.
Yeah, no, we're not there yet. And we're basically out of time to get there.
Yeah, and there's a couple weeks left. Hochul's team is going on the attack on abortion. A really smart decision in New York. They're pushing back on crime messaging, which is interesting.
Somebody needs to have an answer for it.
Yeah, I think there's the general consent. There's been a general idea to maybe roll back some of this stuff in the future. But they're trying to push back on that message. Hochul is trying to emphasize her Democratic support, her Democratic values in the state that voted for Joe Biden by 23%. Obviously, Republicans have a lot to be excited about in New York in the future. And I mean in the deep future, right? Because upstate doesn't look as bad as it used to be. You got this Orthodox Jewish support growing in New York. They did better in every New York borough except New York City. Like, long term, those are very positive things for Republicans. If you could get the city to 30, 40% Republican, statewide races could become competitive. They're just not there yet, and they're not going to be there for decades unless they continue to grow their party, which is very doubtful if that was a one-time thing for Trump or if they can continue that trend going forward. Right now, though, this is not something to be excited about. Democrats, Oklahoma, they could be interested in the future in Tulsa and Oklahoma City growing. Those could be genuine things in the future that make a state that's plus 33, maybe somewhere in the 10 to 15 range in the future, in the deep future, again, years down the line.
Yeah, 15, 20 years down the
Yeah.
line.
I'm not suggesting that in 20, 30, 40 years, New York will be a red state. I'm suggesting that's a possible future, is that New York City gets red enough to that point because of those new trends where it could be maybe a plus 10 or 15 state, in which case Republicans would have a better shot at winning things. They're not there yet. They're not either of these places. They're not there yet.
No, I don't see a justification for moving either of them yet.
Yeah.
Even if Stitt has not led a single public poll, which I actually don't think he has. I think he's been down in every single public.
He's led a
poll.
few. He's led a few.
Has he?
Yeah, there were a few. Let me look at the.
Yeah, I haven't seen one.
There's only been a handful of polls. They've been fairly low quality. We're talking like Sooner poll. He's led most polls. He's led a vast majority of polls, but the last 3 polls have had very small Hoffmeister leads, as well as the Ascend Action poll, which is kind of a joke. Another thing here that we've mentioned before, we'll mention again, we do not expect Chuck Schumer to win by 12 points. We expect him to win by at least 20 points. We don't expect either Democratic Senate candidate in Oklahoma to get 40% of the vote. This is what the polls are suggesting. That right there shows a potential problem with some of this.
Yeah, I am. If Schumer only wins by 12, Democrats are having an awful night.
Yeah, a clearly awful night. This is, again, a person who rarely loses a county statewide. I just don't see it. I don't see it right now. We got a couple weeks, though. Again, I've been clear, though. If the polls are showing things and we can figure out a reason for this, then we consider moving it. But right now, we just don't see it there yet.
No.
I do want to answer one thing real quick, though, because we had a good question here. What makes a credible poll? Is it Quinnipiac or YouGov? What makes a strong poll? People are questioning right-leaning pollsters like Trafalgar because their numbers...
Trafalgar's numbers make no sense.
They make no sense. Trafalgar has basically guessed into things, but their numbers don't make... Their numbers are internally inconsistent. They do not make sense.
They made it up in 2020. They just got lucky. Vermont is not going to be within 4 points.
Yeah.
It's just not.
And on the other hand, again, I mentioned Big Penguin. They're not a real pollster. I'm mentioning them as a joke. They literally are making up polls. They're as real as Florida Guy. If you remember Florida Guy. Florida Guy polling.
Florida Guy polling was great.
They're as real as Florida Guy. On the Democratic side, Quinnipiac, yeah. They don't model voters. That's really bad. On the other hand, they're not making up numbers.
Yeah, the reason people don't dismiss YouGov and Quinnipiac is not because they're the best pollsters in the world. It's because they're giving out real numbers.
Yeah. And on the other hand, I don't know if you've been around a lot. Everyone and their mother is shitting on Center Street polling because their polling is fake. Their polling is it's not real. They're making up the numbers. I don't know if you saw their thing. These are push polls. These are push polls designed to support candidates they like. They admit they're not reflective of the environment, and the best defense that their pollster has. Oh, sorry. I don't know what that was.
You good? The Center Street polling's got you all choked up.
Yeah, no. I just had something in my throat. Center Street polling's their best excuse for this was that no poll is bad until the results come in, which is bullshit. Let's be clear. That is bullshit.
That's not true. Trafalgar's Vermont poll is bad. Before the results come in, it is bad.
Mm-hmm.
No. Their Washington poll, also bad. So, yeah, and YouGov, I don't trust them all that much because aren't their polls done online?
YouGov isn't great, but again, they're posting real numbers.
They're posting real numbers. I don't know how credible their real numbers are, but they're real.
Yeah. Basically, the comparison here is between things that are not real and things that may be bad, but are at least real.
I'm not even convinced Trafalgar's actually calling voters. I'm not convinced.
Again, like I'm not going to dismiss the Wick poll out of hand. I don't know anything about the Wick poll. I will dismiss public policy polling. I've mentioned them before. They're a terrible pollster.
I'm okay with dismissing
Yeah.
PPP.
Again, this is a company. The reason I will do that is one, their polls are terrible, and two, they've admitted in the past to withholding polls because they were bad for the candidate they wanted to support. And one of those polls resulted in an election where the candidate that they were supporting lost, and their poll accurately showed that person would lose. That is the moment most people stop taking public policy polling very seriously. I stopped taking them seriously too, for that matter, when they were polling Republican voters and like, do you support bombing Agrabah? And then put out a poll like Republican voters want to bomb Agrabah. I'm like, no, people are like literally they
I missed discourse.
bombed the city from Aladdin. This was like years ago. They sent out a poll, and one of the questions in the poll was what percentage of voters was asking people to support bombing Agrabah. And like a majority of voters supported bombing it. And they're like, these idiot Republicans want to bomb Agrabah. And like, what are you trying to accomplish here? This is stupid.
Yeah, you're just, what are you doing?
But yeah, there are Democratic leaning pollsters. We will absolutely tell you are not reliable. We're just not going to take Trafalgar seriously until, their numbers stop being,
silly,
bad. Yeah. Like, Again, that's it. Yeah, the samples are a problem too. Yeah,
again, the samples are not good.
We've mentioned this before. When you're doing a generic ballot poll and you're showing Democrats up 5, and the sample is D plus 13, that could be a problem. On the other hand, you at least had a sample. We can at least look at it and say, this is probably not entirely accurate here, but I'm pretty sure you called people.
Yeah, you called too many of a specific type of people.
Sure. Your poll is 80%. You're sure your poll is 70% graduate students. At least you called them.
Yeah, you called actual voters. Like I said, not convinced Trafalgar does. They don't release crosstabs, and the one time they did, those crosstabs looked very, very similar.
They looked uniform. They looked uniform and consistent, which is not how that should work. Again, if you take in statistics, I have taken statistics. I took statistics in college. I got an 100 on my statistics final. It's the only final I ever got 100 on. That's sketchy. Their numbers don't make any sense at all. So like,
yeah,
there's only so much you can do there if the numbers are just complete garbage, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and they keep mentioning Barris polling. I'm actually not even familiar with Barris.
That's the big data poll.
Still not ringing a bell.
Yeah, that's the guy that had Brian Kemp going to a runoff.
Yeah, I don't see it. I don't see it.
Yeah, big data poll is not good.
Do they have any relation to Big Penguin polling?
Not as far as I know. Only one of those accounts has an anime girl as their avatar. I will say that.
I love that there was about 3 hours where people thought they were a legit pollster again.
Even though at the time their logo was a stock photo or was a stock image of the penguin render from Super Mario 64, and people were taking this seriously.
Beautiful.
They're not real. They're not real.
They're not real. They're not real. Just like the Trafalgar poll of Vermont.
Yeah, here you go. Yeah, here's the Agrabah poll. In this poll, public policy polling asked the 532 Republicans, would you support or oppose bombing Agrabah? 57% of responders said they were not sure. 30% said they supported bombing it. I would have answered yes for the lulz because that is hilarious.
On the other hand, Americans have such a bad grasp of geography that I don't necessarily doubt that. I do not doubt that number.
Confused by Agrabah, probably confused Baghdad and Agrabah because all these cities sound the same. Aleppo. Where is Aleppo? What is Aleppo?
What is Aleppo? Where is it? Nobody knows.
Oh God, that is still one of the single most embarrassing. That's right up there with the Rick Perry not being able to name the 3 agencies he wanted to eliminate.
That is
But
bad. Oh boy. You know, for all of the dumb things Trump and Biden have said, they haven't done anything quite that bad. Yeah. Do we
yeah,
have any?
it's
Do we have anything else?
no. I think that's pretty much it, right? I mean, we basically got. Oh, we actually have a new governor poll from Oregon. Data for
Is that
data for progress. Christine Drazen up 43 to 42.
Look, Data for Progress, they may be Democratic leaning, but they publish legit numbers.
Yes, they're bad numbers,
but they're legit.
Yeah, they're legitimate numbers. They're bad. Like again, you have Jamie Harrison winning. Your polls are not good, but
although in fairness, I do think they've fixed their numbers because Jamie Harrison, a poll that would show Jamie Harrison winning would also not show Christine Drazen winning.
Right. They have Ron Wyden up 51 to 40. I can buy 40 as the ceiling for Perkins. Oregon is a weird state. Republicans have a floor of like 35% federally, but it's more like 40% in statewide races, not in presidential years.
Yeah, that number for Perkins seems a little high.
Yeah, it seems a little high, but it's not prohibitively awful.
Unheard of.
Yeah, it's not prohibitively awful.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think we'll see when the election comes around, but I think that number sounds about right for where we're at.
But yeah, like again, that's a pollster. I've taken issue with Data for Progress before. I think they have issues in elections, but their data, for what it's worth, is also not skewing towards Democrats wholly like it was last time. They're actually putting out numbers that would go against the partisan lean. That is a good thing. That is an indication that you're putting out real polls, because the polls are not showing consistently what you want them to show. I guarantee you, the guys who are running Data for Progress do not want Christina Drazen to win in Oregon.
No,
they do not want that to happen.
No, and they're publishing it, so legit pollster.
Yeah. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Larger than expected tonight, actually. Maybe we should consider doing the Saturday ones more often, or still do them on Friday. But we got a lot of viewers tonight, so we appreciate you for that. Be sure to check out our website at elections-daily.com. We'll be launching a new tool very soon. We're excited to let you know about it. It's a brand new tool. We've been working on it behind the scenes. We have this coming out sometime this week, probably. Super excited to show it to you. It's at elections-daily.com. You can find us at Twitter at elections_daily. Whether you're watching us on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, wherever else, listening to us on podcast platforms, we really appreciate your support and would love it if you would like and subscribe, maybe share with your friends. Everything you do helps us support what we're doing. We would not be here without you guys. We would not be in the situation without you guys. We really, really appreciate everything you've done for us. So thank you again. We'll be back here next week, hopefully on Friday again. If we don't, I will let you know if you have to reschedule. But until then, we will see you next time for next week's edition of Elections Weekly.